a Soviet research station, abandoned for 40 years. The last entry in the logbook read, "The subject will not stop moving." She went in alone to find the truth. And on her first night, something pressed against the wall with a weight. She fell through the floor. The storm that followed trapped her for days in minus 31-degree cold, 63 kilometers from the nearest human being. But the cold wasn't the thing that almost broke her. It was the shape at the tree line that stood perfectly still, watched her fire, and was never once afraid of her. The last coordinates Mara Sevik wrote in her field notebook were 62 degrees north, 119 degrees east, a point so far into the Siberian interior that the nearest village existed only as a smudge on a 1970s Soviet survey map. She wrote them carefully, with the particular deliberateness of someone who knows a record might outlive its author. She had been 29 years old when she flew into Yakutsk in late September, carrying a satellite phone with a dying battery, 12 days of rations, and a story that no one in Moscow had been willing to chase. That part mattered to her. She had spent 6 years as a freelance journalist filing dispatches from places editors found inconvenient. Flooded river towns, post-industrial wastelands, the margins where the state's attention ran thin. She was good at margins. She understood them in a way that people raised in cities rarely do. The story was this. Somewhere in the Verkhoyansk taiga, there existed the ruins of a Soviet research installation that had been officially decommissioned in 1983. Station Kolyurin. According to documents she had obtained through a researcher at Moscow State University, documents that had caused the researcher to grow quiet and stop returning her calls, Kolyurin had not been an ordinary weather station. The records suggested biological work, atmospheric testing, and a final log entry that simply read, "The subjects will not stop moving." Nobody had been back. Nobody had been sent to investigate. In 40 years, the forest had presumably done what Siberian forest does, swallowed everything, smoothed the wound, left no scar. Mara wanted to find whatever remained before that process completed. She wanted to stand in the place and understand what had happened there, even if understanding meant filing a story that no one would print. She hired a guide in a small settlement 3 days south of her target zone. His name was Grigory. He was 56, built like a man who had spent decades carrying heavy things, and he agreed to take her as far as the river crossing, no further. He didn't ask about the station. People from that region had an instinct for not asking about certain things. It was a survival skill older than journalism. They traveled on horseback for 2 days. The taiga in late September was a landscape in the process of dying beautifully. Birch leaves turning the color of old brass, the air carrying a clean, cold edge that made everything feel precise and slightly unreal. Mara rode behind Grigory and wrote notes in her field book with one hand while the horse moved beneath her. She was happy in the specific way that only arrives when you are doing exactly the thing you believe you're made to do. On the second evening, Grigory stopped and pointed at the ground without speaking. Tracks large, elongated, pressed deep into the soft earth near the riverbank. Not wolf, not bear, not any shape she recognized. The stride was too wide and too regular, as if whatever had made them was neither hurrying nor wandering, but moving with the calm purpose of something that had no reason to fear being followed. Grigory said nothing that night. In the morning, he returned her payment in full and rode south without turning to look back. She crossed the river alone, hauling her pack above her head through water that stopped her breath with its coldness, and found the station 3 hours later. It sat in a shallow depression between 2 ridges, concealed by decades of encroaching pine. The buildings were the gray, flat-roofed architecture of Soviet practicality. 3 structures still mostly standing, 2 reduced to foundations and rust. Mara moved through them with her torch in the fading afternoon light, photographing everything, reading what remained of the wall-mounted charts and logbooks with a methodical focus that was her professional gift. Most of the records were ruined, pages merged into gray blocks by decades of damp. But in the third building, a smaller structure that might have been a personal office, she found a metal cabinet that had kept its seal. Inside, a dozen sealed sample vials, labeled in Cyrillic with numbers and dates. a reel-to-reel tape still in its canister, and a logbook, handwritten, the final 50 pages still legible. She sat on the floor and read until she couldn't see. The logs described experiments she didn't fully understand, something to do with neural tissue samples collected from animals in an extreme hibernation state, a theory about suspended metabolic function, notations about unexpected results. Then, in the final weeks of entries, a change in tone that felt like a door slowly closing. The lead researcher, one Dr. V. Malchenko, began writing in shorter sentences, factual to the point of blankness. Then a single entry that said, "It came back inside last night. We cannot account for its behavior. We cannot account for our own." The last line, written in a different hand, "The subject will not stop moving." Mara photographed every page, sealed the logbook in her pack, and made camp inside the most intact building because the temperature had dropped 15 degrees since sunset and the trees were making sounds she could not identify. Not branches, not wind. A slow, intermittent creaking that moved in a direction, grew closer, then stopped. She told herself, old trees. She told herself, pressure changes. She closed her eyes and believed it, which is its own kind of survival skill, until around 3 in the morning when something pressed against the outer wall of the building with a weight she felt through the floor. She lay completely still for 6 minutes. She counted them. Then the pressure lifted and the footsteps, because they were footsteps, moved away into the dark. She should have left in the morning. She knew she should have left. But the cabinet held one more reel of tape, and her recorder still had battery, and she was the kind of journalist who stays for the second reel. This is the quality that makes certain people extraordinary and other people dead, and the distance between those two outcomes is mostly chance. She was 2 hours into transcribing the tape. Audio recordings of the final weeks, voices she couldn't match to names, the strange quality of people choosing their words very carefully. When the temperature dropped again and her satellite phone displayed the weather update she had not checked in 4 days. Incoming system. Winds to 90 kilometers per hour. Temperature forecast, -31. Duration. Estimated 5 to 7 days. In the Siberian interior in late September, that isn't a weather event. It is a verdict. She packed in 12 minutes. She made it across the river before the sky turned the color of iron. Then the storm hit, and the taiga became a different place entirely. The cold in a Siberian blizzard is not like cold elsewhere. It does not arrive gradually. It invades. It finds the gaps in clothing, the place where scarf meets collar, the insufficiently insulated ridge of each ear, and it works there with a quiet, surgical patience. Mara had a good jacket, layered properly, and it was not enough. Nothing she had brought was enough because she had packed for 12 days of hard travel, not 5 days of stationary freezing. And those are different problems requiring different preparations. She tried to move south, navigating by compass because the snow had erased all other reference points. The trees were enormous and dark and identical in every direction, and the wind cut across them in a way that made sound unreliable, directional, frightening. She walked for 4 hours and believed she was moving south. On the 5th hour, she recognized a cluster of birch trees she had passed in the 2nd hour and understood she had been walking in a circle. She built a shelter for what she could gather, a frame of fallen branches packed with pine boughs, the technique from a winter survival manual she had read 3 years ago for a story she never filed. The shelter was better than nothing. Nothing would have killed her in a night. The shelter would kill her in 3 days, perhaps 4. She ate carefully, half rations, then third rations. She melted snow in a metal cup over a fire that cost her more energy to maintain than it provided warmth. She slept in short intervals, waking herself before she could drift into the kind of deep sleep that becomes a permanent one. Her toes went numb on the 2nd day. She rubbed them for an hour and they returned, not without cost. And through all of it, the blizzard, the cold, the calculation of days remaining, she felt watched. Not with paranoia, with the specific, grounded certainty of a person who has spent enough time in wild places to know the difference between imagination and information. Something was circling her shelter. Every few hours, the footfalls returned. that slow, deliberate rhythm. Not predatory, she had read enough about predator behavior to recognize the approach pattern, but something else. Curious, perhaps, or patient in a way that had no name. On the third night, she saw it. A shape at the tree-line, barely distinguishable from shadow. Large. The proportions wrong in a way she couldn't precisely name, as if something familiar had been assembled from memory by someone who had only ever heard a description. It stood for a long time, and it watched her fire, and then it retreated, and she sat with her back against the shelter wall with her knife in her hand and her notebook in her lap, and she wrote the most precise description she could produce because description was the only tool she had left. On the fourth day, the storm broke. Clean, absolute silence. The sky was a white that hurt to look at. She was frostbitten on 3 fingers and 1 toe. She had food remaining for approximately 30 hours at minimum subsistence. She was, by her best calculation, 63 kilometers from the nearest human settlement, in terrain made treacherous by half a meter of new snow. She walked. The thing, she had stopped calling it anything more specific than that in her notes, kept pace with her. She heard it in the trees to the west, paralleling her line of travel, never approaching, never retreating far. On the second day of walking, she stopped pretending she didn't know it was there. She simply moved, and it moved with her, and she stopped wondering what it wanted and focused on the arithmetic of survival. How far? How fast? How much warmth remained in her core? How many steps before the next rest? Her frostbitten fingers swelled and burned. She lost sensation in her left foot for 6 hours on the second afternoon and recovered it by stopping and removing her boot and pressing her foot against her stomach under her jacket for 40 minutes in the killing cold. She cried during those 40 minutes, not from pain but from the accumulated weight of days, the specific grief of understanding how small a margin separates living from not, and how thoroughly she had misjudged it. On the third morning of walking, she found a frozen river and followed it south, and by midday the river widened and the tree line on the eastern bank showed a cut trail, an axe cut, recent, the wood inside still pale and raw. She followed the trail for 2 hours on legs that had ceased to feel like hers and emerged into a small settlement. 8 buildings, smoke from 2 chimneys, a dog that barked and brought a woman to the door. The woman took one look at Mara's hands and face and pulled her inside without asking anything at all. She pressed a cup of tea into Mara's swollen fingers, and she said something in a dialect Mara only partially understood, and what she understood translated roughly as, "You came out of the north." Mara nodded. The woman said something else. It translated as, "Nothing comes out of the north." She spent 11 days recovering in the settlement before transport arrived. A doctor reached her on the 6th day, treating the frostbite and telling her with professional bluntness that she would keep all 10 fingers and all 10 toes, which was not guaranteed and should be considered good fortune, not competence. Mara filed the story 4 months later, after transcribing the tapes in full, after finding a biologist who could decode Malchenko's notation, after sitting with the knowledge for long enough that she trusted what she would say with it. The story ran in a small investigative outlet, with a circulation of 11,000. It was shared widely enough to matter. She did not write about the shape at the tree line, not because she doubted what she had seen, because she understood, in the way that the taiga had taught her, that some records belong to the place that made them, and some evidence is better left where it chose to stay. She kept the description in her field notebook, the one with the coordinates on the last page. She keeps the notebook in a drawer and does not often open it. And when she does, she reads her own handwriting with the particular attention of someone studying a language she once spoke fluently and hopes she will not need again. But she has never stopped checking the weather before she sleeps.